That's the picture of life that we found. So the question is, if that's the picture of life, that's what happened, what explains it? In order to answer that, you need to recognize that life has both invention and information. Now, what do I mean by invention? I mean the specific arrangement of specific parts into higher complex structures resulting in a function. Now, you might look at a pile of sand. That's not going to be what we understand as invention. You can cut it in half, still have a pile of sand. Nothing really happened, right? No particular arrangement, no particular parts, no particular function. A circuit board, on the other hand, if you cut that in half, it's no longer full. It doesn't accomplish its purpose, right? It's the specific arrangement of specific parts collected into a higher complex structure for a function. That's what I mean by invention. Now, what we find is that life is an example of that latter, the invention. If components for body plans are not present or assembled properly, the invention is not functional. We need all parts to be present and arranged just right. Specificity is key. That word's going to be huge when understanding invention. Now, some have argued that life is irreducibly complex, and that's another conversation. I'm just going to brush over it, but basically, they argue that all these specific parts need to be present and arranged just right from the start. They don't progress and eventually get there. In order to have life functional and being able to survive from the start, you need all these pieces just right and organized properly. An example given is a mousetrap. You know, there are 5 parts. If you take out one, or if it's not put together just right, it won't function. As Charles Darwin states, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organism existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Now, some have argued, such as biochemist Michael Behe, that such structures exist. Here are a couple examples. That's another conversation on the side that could be dove into. I just want to talk about what is the simplest examples of life that we find, and what does that tell us about the complexity and how it must have been that complex from the start. Now, it's been determined what the minimally complex cell would require, and it would require about 250 proteins bonded just right, each composed of about 150 amino acids. Now, what is the probability of getting one of these simplest living cells from a prebiotic soup? It's been calculated to be just 1 chance in 10 to the 41,000th power. What does that look like? According to molecular biologists, if all the events in history were devoted to simply trying to throw stuff together and result in this simplest cell, we would have only 1 out of a trillion chances. And that's just to have a 50% chance. That's not even to have a good chance of getting it. For the simplest living cell, even in the history of the universe itself, seems unlikely. There's simply no such thing as simple life. See, we can only assume that life arose in the absence of intelligence when we assume it's simple. What we find is that there's no such thing as simple life. Even the simplest cell by itself is not simple. It's an example of stunning invention. As explained by biochemist Michael Denton, the complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it is impossible to accept that such an object could have been thrown together suddenly by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from miracle. And he goes on to say, molecular biology has shown that even the simplest of all living systems on Earth today, bacterial cells, are exceedingly complex objects. Although the tiniest bacterial cells are incredibly small, weighing less than 10 to 12 GMS, each is in effect a veritable micro-miniaturized factory containing thousands of exquisitely designed pieces of intricate molecular machinery, made up altogether of 100,000 million atoms, far more complicated than any machine built by man, and absolutely without parallel in the non-living world. So we see that there's abundant and impressive invention within life. But let's wrap up talking about information. According to Professor of Zoology at Oxford University, an atheist himself, he said that life, even at its simplest, the simplest cell contains the equivalent amount of information, specified complexity, which we talked about earlier, as 30 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. The simplest cell. How about the simplest organism, the amoeba? He said that the amoeba has the equivalent amount of information, specified complexity, as 1,000 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Once again, there's no such thing as simple life. There's no such thing as life that is not information rich. As explained by Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, DNA is like a computer program, but far more advanced than any software ever created. Life, at its simplest, is the greatest example of invention and information on the planet, unparalleled in our own human invention. So, as we wrap up this argument, we ask, where does invention and information come from? Now, because invention and information are examples of specified complexity, you can equally ask, where does specified complexity come from? And the answer is intelligence. Our repeated experience confirms that only intelligence is capable of doing this for one simple reason. Organization does not happen by accident. We talked about entropy earlier. The universe is such that it becomes more disordered over time, not more ordered and organized. Now, organization, and we saw that these coordinated changes directed towards a specific function and purpose requires intentionality and purpose. Such things only exist within a mind. And that's why our repeated experience concludes that only intelligence is capable of such things.